The James Bond series is one of the most fascinating case studies of a massive film franchise. Unlike many other long-lasting movie-based intellectual properties, which have been adapted for contemporary audiences by spinning off into various other media outlets, the formula for Eon Productions' 007 movies has largely remained the same since Dr. No in 1962. The success of the Daniel Craig films, including No Time to Die, certainly proves that this model still has merits, but the release of the newest instalment was surrounded by controversies and debates about the main character, his views, and the views of the filmmakers, especially regarding women and female representation in the series, and by extension, what place a character like this has in modern cinema. How then has No Time to Die attempted to capture and retain the relevancy of the series, and ensure that the formula of these films will continue to be sustainable for years to come? Firstly, let's identify what makes the James Bond franchise unique in 2021. Since the early success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, film studios have flocked to create similar shared multimedia story worlds by either using IP they already own or acquiring new IP with the potential for this kind of storytelling. Arguably few franchises have been able to achieve the level of cohesiveness of the MCU movies, but pre-existing IPs dominate the media landscape all the same. Other franchises which previously adhered to the same sequential movie release formula as the Bond franchise, that is to say a new film or show every few years which are largely self-contained, like the early Star Trek shows, have now become vast transmedia sandboxes which encompass films, television series, cartoons, video games, books and comics. Yet Bond has resisted this shift in audience expectations. There is an argument that the Daniel Craig films are perhaps more interconnected than those of previous actors, featuring recurring storylines and key characters that cross over from one film to the next. However, unlike some other major franchises like Marvel and Star Wars, which carry over storylines and key characters between media outlets and treat those stories with the same level of canon, Bond remains exclusively a film franchise without any spin-off sub-franchises. Indeed, these films are the epitome of event cinema, a fact that the producers, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, are keenly aware of. They have expressed an active resistance to spinning off the franchise into other multimedia projects like television series or other film sub-franchises, for fear of diluting the content of the series and diminishing the status of the films. There has been some speculation that Lashana Lynch's character could be the subject of such a sub-franchise, yet there has been no indication from the producers that this is the case, and any discussion surrounding future 007 projects, though in its very early stages, suggest that the franchise is scheduled to continue on as it always has, with a new actor to be cast as James Bond in a soft reboot. The notion that diluting a franchise can result in diminished returns is a plausible one. An obvious example is the Star Wars franchise. When you look at the two subsequent trilogies, the prequels and the sequels, the first installment, The Phantom Menace and The Force Awakens respectively, were the highest grossing films. There is an argument that the lack of films in the build-up to these trilogies therefore allowed audience anticipation and hype to build exponentially, resulting in a significantly higher box office take. However, this line of thinking is limited. The other obvious example is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers Endgame became not only the highest grossing film in the series, but the highest grossing film of all time for a brief period of time, and that film was the 22nd to be released in a span of just 11 years. However, the Marvel franchise is different in the sense that it encapsulates a whole plethora of sub-franchises which cross over, whereas the Star Wars series prior to 2016 and the Bond series do not. And as discussed, the MCU has proven to be wildly successful, and other cinematic universes which were attempted in its wake have failed to reach the same level of financial and critical outcome, so it could be argued that the Marvel films are the exception rather than the rule. Regardless of whether Bond would work as a cinematic universe or not, it appears the filmmakers are reluctant to try and are instead planning to maintain the same release formula indefinitely. So returning to the question posed by this video, what exactly does No Time to Die do to accomplish this in a modern cultural climate? Bond as a franchise, despite its rigidity in its release format, is actually a somewhat elastic series, willing to adapt to the times and context in which its films are produced. 2006's Casino Royale presented a bold, fresh take on the character, with the filmmakers choosing a more gritty, realistic tone compared to the earlier Pierce Brosnan films, a tone which was more commonplace in other action films of the early 2000s. And in the 15 years since that film came out, action film conventions have shifted yet again. Audiences have, some exceptions notwithstanding, started to become tired of this darker, grittier tone in big-budget action movies, and are once again leaning back towards light-hearted romps. The success of the Kingsman movies is a perfect example of this. These films are comical and pay homage to the older Bond films, featuring ridiculous gadgets, villains and action set pieces. And 2016's Jason Bourne, a continuation of the Bourne films of the early 2000s which directly inspired Casino Royale, proved to be a disappointment amongst audiences and critics and fared poorly financially. And so, since Skyfall, we have slowly seen the Bond movies return to this slightly more fantastical setting, featuring more heavily the tropes of the earlier films. Nostalgia in the modern film industry has proven time and time again to be what draws a crowd. Some of the most fiscally and critically successful current blockbusters and television series draw on the audience's memories of older installments in the same intellectual property so as to entice them to watch these newer installments. The marketing for upcoming films like Ghostbusters Afterlife and Spider-Man No Way Home highlight characters and iconography that made the earlier works so memorable as a key tactic in bringing in old fans, and has the added benefit of enticing newer fans to watch and catch up on the older works before seeing the new. I would argue that Skyfall, Spectre and No Time to Die would fulfill this requirement. The marketing for No Time to Die in particular specifically highlights the Aston Martin DB5 and its use in a key action sequence, a villain who feels perhaps more at home in the classic films with a plan of mass extermination and his own private island lair to boot, the classic gun barrel shot which ends the trailer, and of course the famous theme song. The audience immediately associates these tropes and visual cues with the 007 branding and is designed by the producers to evoke memories of the earlier films. Nostalgia plays a key role in many modern media productions, and No Time to Die is no exception. Returning to the MCU, after the success of those films and television series, audiences have also come to expect a level of continuity in their franchises which was previously not anticipated. And the Craig Bond films are, as briefly mentioned, much more interconnected than the earlier films. Although No Time to Die could be watched on its own, in order to understand many critical story elements and motivations of most of the characters, you must first have watched Spectre, and many of Spectre's story elements cannot be fully appreciated without having first watched Skyfall, and so on. This is in stark contrast to, say, the Connery films, which although had the continuous looming threat of Spectre threading between films, can largely be enjoyed as standalone films. And finally, although this video is not especially concerned with No Time to Die's portrayal of female characters, as that is a whole topic in and of itself and requires a much greater analysis, it is important to note that the main female characters in the film are actively involved with advancing the plot, and are regularly shown to be on an equal footing to Bond and the other male characters. This is hugely important to the success of modern Bond films going forward, as the representations of women and gender roles in the earlier movies, while indicative of the time period and context in which they were produced, are considered by many to be regressive and archaic. If the producers continue to depict women purely as objects for Bond to lust over without any agency of their own, I think it is a fair assessment to suggest that audiences would quickly turn against these films. So by adapting to contemporary conventions and expectations, while still employing the tropes and iconography of the older movies, No Time to Die has managed to retain the cultural status of the Bond films for modern audiences. Not every franchise requires a constant stream of content across various media outlets to remain relevant, and I think Bond genuinely benefits from its scarcity of content. How sustainable this formula will be going forward is impossible to say, but the same could be said of any release strategy for any major film franchise. The Marvel bubble is still yet to burst, but like the westerns before it, one day, surely a new trend will usurp it, and Hollywood will divert its attention away from superheroes and towards whatever will be popular next. For Bond to have survived and thrived as a series for almost 60 years is a testament to the producers and filmmakers involved, and as a fan of the series I hope to see it continue and enjoy the same success for many years to come. But No Time to Die certainly proves that there is still a tremendous appetite for these movies, and as long as they continue to adapt to an ever-changing cultural context, there can be little doubt that they will continue to resonate with audiences everywhere. Thank you for watching this video. What did you think of No Time to Die, and did you think it was successful in its goals as a franchise film or not? I'd love to hear what you think. It's a truly fascinating case study of a modern blockbuster film, and as the 25th entry in a long-running franchise, and I'd love to delve more into its gender representations in a future video. If you've enjoyed this video and would be interested to see more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. But until next time, thanks.